Are you a South African musician trying to figure out when you should get a music manager? Welcome to this episode where I plan on demystifying just that. Cue the intro. What's up, it's your boy Skill from SkillMusicSA.com and welcome to my channel where I share information with my fellow South African musicians to help them improve on their music business. If this sounds interesting to you, please do consider subscribing. In this video, I plan on sharing my opinions on more or less when you should consider getting a music manager. I would like to clarify that this is an opinion and obviously it's not a rule or set in stone. So if you disagree with what I'm about to say, please feel free to discuss it down in the comments and I will engage with you because I typically like discussing music business in general. So without further ado, let me get into it. I would like to start with more or less an analogy. Typically, businesses more or less operate the same. They figure out the expenses, they figure out the income, and they more or less try and make a profit by reducing expenses and increasing the income. So I'm going to give you an analogy to explain when I think you should more or less consider getting a music manager. So let's say you want to start a business where you are selling Vetkoeks. So you want to establish the expenses. So typically you have to buy flour, you have to buy yeast, you have to buy oil, pots and pans, transport to get where you're selling, and some form of branding or marketing budget in order to establish the expenses. These are operational costs and you have to kind of know how much everything costs if you practice a good business anyway. So you understand how much the expenses are. And now you move over to the income. So once you understand the expenses, it costs you more or less, let's say R2.50 to make one Vetkoek. And then with the incomes, you check every month you're getting money in. And so the expense for each guinya there, it's R2.50 and the income for each one is R2.50. So it's more or less equal. It's balanced, there's no profits being made, you're just breaking even. Now, hypothetically, would it make good business sense to get a manager in this situation? Most likely not, because the manager would increase the expenses and your income will more or less stay the same because they are managing the process. So it is not good practice when you're not making profits, in this case, to add a manager. But now let's modify the system slightly. You've set up your expenses, you're now buying bulk, you've reduced the expenses per Vetkoek. You've also got a spare employee, but you're still running the show because you need to understand how the system will work, and you've set up systems to make everything a lot smoother, less time consuming, and you're making money. So now overall, your cost per Vetkoek is let's say 3 Rand, but now your income has gone up to 5 Rand. So you're making a 2 Rand profit for each Vetkoek. 2 Rand profit for each Vetkoek. Eventually you realize your business is finally spiraling control. You've managed to synthesize the business to have systems where you do not have to physically be there every time to check that everything is working. But now you're thinking up of diversifying, but you're not too sure on how to go about doing this, but you understand thoroughly how the business operates and your profits have maxed out. Now, to the best of your ability, you can no longer manage the baby that you have created. So you have to start getting experts to help expand what the current business is. To the best of your ability, you can no longer improve on your current hustle. Now, that is when you get a manager, because you thoroughly understand how the system works. You can teach the manager how it currently works. Once they know how your system works for your Vetkoek business, they can implement their managerial perfectionist whatever skills to improve the business, to either increase profits or to have input on the business and therefore creating more profits for you. Now, that is when you consider getting a manager. And this goes across the board for most businesses. The only time they consider getting a manager is once they can no longer manage their system themselves, but they've kind of implemented preliminary systems to manage their current business. Now let's move this over to how musicians can implement. Basically, as a musician, you also have expenses. They vary depending on what kind of musician you are, but you typically have to pay for sessions, recording, equipment, travel costs, food, etc., etc. You have your own expenses and you also have your own incomes where you get them from depending on what type of musician you are, but you perform live, you get streaming, you have other revenue streams similar to the music business, but you typically have incomes. You are technically able to know the incomes and expenses, therefore you know the profits that you are making. So with your current hustle, understanding how the incomes and expenses work and how you're making profits, that's the only real way you'll be able to know if you can afford to pay someone else or if you can afford to have someone take away from your profits. That is typically when I think you should get a manager. Once you start making profits, because that person doesn't want to work for free, and at the end of the day, they're already taking 10 to 30% of your profits. So you've technically increased your expenses by adding a manager. So I highly suggest, if you're a musician, you have to set up your business to understand how the incomes and the expenses work within your business. Now, a lot of the conversations that I've been having with regards to getting a manager, people kind of expect someone to parent them into the music industry or perhaps mentor them, but that is a totally different aspect of what a manager does, and there are different types of managers. So I typically only get someone to manage different sections of my business for short-term periods. So if I have a music project, I will get someone specifically to manage just the radio plugin, and then they will get a percentage, or I'll pay them upfront to focus just on that, and I will do the rest of the business because I want to minimize the expense that goes into making that project. In general, you don't want someone to just be taking a great bunch of the money without you understanding what they will actually be doing. And the only way to do that is to understand how your actual business works and to understand the other business side of things. So the things that I typically teach on this channel, such as SAMRO, Capasso, typical rights, etc. But this is basically my opinion. Only consider getting a music manager once you start making profits. But that concludes this video. I hope you found it informative. Don't be shy to discuss this out in the comments. I will be checking it out, and I will be engaging with people that actually disagree or agree, whatever your perspective is on when to get a manager, or if you have a totally different perspective. I'd really like to hear that out in the comments. But that concludes this video, and until next time, Skill again, the hooligan, signing out.